Alana, it's great to see you. Sorry. Yay! It's all right. It's good to see you, Joe. We'll pray later on for the Pulellas. Alana's expecting, so we just want to pray for blessings, right, on the family. So, how are you going, Epi?
I'm good.
You're good? Should we start talk or not yet? You just let me know.
Start to talk.
I can start the talk. So we're recording.
Yeah.
Oh, we are. Great. Oh. All right.
Are we?
Yeah, it's being live streamed. Great, you're starting great. So yielding to the Spirit. I wanted to start out just by even breaking down this statement, if I could, just yielding. What does it mean to yield? I thought, just bear with me for a second, as I just talk to yield, right? When I just Googled, searched, or looked the dictionary up to say, well, what does yield mean? It actually said something like this. It says to give way to pressure. Right? You want to yield to the Spirit, give way to pressure. The pressure of the Spirit doesn't quite make much sense, right? It kind of looked a bit paradoxical to think that somehow we're meant to, give in to the pressure of God. Let me first just say that when it comes to yielding to the Spirit, it's God's Spirit that is in us that is drawing us to Himself, right? And we're really becoming like God. That's the whole purpose of our spiritual journey. And God has given us every grace to kind of move in that direction. So it kind of feels a bit odd to kind of say, or paradoxical to say that we're yielding to the Spirit in a way. But there is pressure in that journey. Because the pressure actually comes from our own sin, the world, and the devil, right? So there is, in a way, pressure that we endure through yielding to the Spirit. Not because God's applying the pressure, but because of the other forces that are in our lives, right? Or around us, right? So when it comes to yielding, let me just see if it's the next slide that I can perfect. What yielding means is that as God's moving us toward Himself, the opportunity before us is that we need to make a moment-to-moment choice. That we need to stop resisting the Spirit's movement and allow God's life to flow through us, and especially through our human will, to choose it, our wills to be formed by Him. I'll get out. People taking some photographs. I'll get out of the road. But really, you see, I've even just identified 4 areas, right, that we're moving out of this and into this, moving out of self-reliance and into trust. Like, that's part of the yielding of the Spirit. God's moving us out of the stubbornness of heart into surrender. God moves us out of spiritual autopilot to attentiveness of His presence. God moves us out of the anxious strivings and He moves us into obedience as a response out of love, right? Now, I suppose it's really good to even stop and consider, because sometimes it's easier to look at maybe even the negative in our lives. Where on this table would you find yourself, right? Of all the 4, self-reliance, stubbornness, spiritual autopilot, just going through the motions, but not being intentional about it, in other words. Or there could be a bit of that anxiousness. I'm striving and I'm pushing, right? Where do you find yourself? And this is just good to start putting ourselves in a bit of a map and a framework, right? Now, I don't know if you want to share it with the person next to you. Anybody feel courageous enough to kind of turn to the person next to them and say, yeah, I could probably pinpoint myself about here?
In all of them?
In all of them. Susan's saying all of them, right? All of them. Yeah. Oh, all right. Oh, we lost even the camera. I think even the camera's feeling a little bit nervous at this point in time, right? It's striving a little bit too hard. That's right. Now, you don't have to share it with the person next to you, right? But look, I think we're probably going to see parts of our own lives in different areas, right? So there's certainly a need to keep growing and yielding to the Spirit. There's a lot more to be said, right? We're just getting warmed up. So, let me say, if I just take a step back and say that there's 2 ways. Now, you've got to forgive me, Appa. I don't know if I'm very good at this.
I'm going the way.
Oh, thanks. No, okay. Not very good at slides, sorry guys. There's actually two ways I want to just summarize yielding to the Spirit. Right? One way, on one hand, is kind of an encouragement for us to move out of sin. That's one expression of what it means to yield to the Spirit. Because there are patterns of sin in our lives, or there can be just patterns of negativity, of areas that are not yielded to God yet. Right? They might be small little patterns, but still lies nonetheless, that keep us away from God's plan. So that's one element in which we're being invited to yield to the Spirit, to find God's truth in our life. Yet, on the other hand, there's also another way in which we are invited to yield to the Spirit, because this is where God invites us to participate in his life. So on one hand, it's just like, I want you to move away from these negative things, but I've got so much more for you to enter into, right? You kind of go on the mission for God and into the things of God, right? You're participating in his very life and the mission in the world, right? And I'm going to start explaining this kind of, this two level of, leaving sin and entering into a newness, right? So because both happen in our lives and they even happen simultaneously. So we need to be open to the fact that God's going to keep working on both of these areas. And when I jump into the scriptures, this idea of yielding to the Spirit mostly surfaces within the words of St. Paul. Now, just picture St. Paul. He's the apostle to the Gentiles, to a whole lot of pagan converts who have not been governed by the laws of Israel, by God's covenant. So he's working with a group of people who are very rough around the edges morally, socially, and St. Paul's having to form them into a people of God. They needed, you could say, a lot of spiritual and moral transformation. When St. Paul starts writing to them about yielding to the Spirit, he's trying to get them to move out of a life of sin, the negative patterns of the flesh, and move into a life that imitates Christ. So if I go ahead and I just take all the words that St. Paul had to say around the words of yielding to the Spirit, I'm sorry it's a lot on one page, but if you can just break it down into 3 columns, that's what I could try to do for you. St. Paul would talk about sins of the flesh, the rather heavy ones. He could talk about relationship issues, things that weaken our sense of communion with one another, even just hostility and strife and conflict and jealousy and envy. There's rivalry and division. There could even be just conceit and refusal to submit, right? Now, we might look at the big drastic ones and think, well, I can't really say that in the last week I've been taking part in some of those areas, but I could possibly say that maybe sometimes in my life, areas of breaking down relationships, well, I can probably identify with some of them. Maybe not in an extreme way, but in some very subtle, small ways, right? All right, what about even some of the areas of my resistance towards God? There could be times I may not like listening to God's voice. Yeah, do I ever want to just kind of shut God up a little bit? Yeah, I think we can possibly acknowledge it can happen. Maybe I might participate or tolerate some evil. Maybe there's a bit of revengefulness as well, pay evil for evil, right? There could even be some idleness and neglect. Hey, I'm sure I could be guilty of idleness and neglect at times, right? Could be even my own prayer life. St. Paul's trying to say, oh, guys, I want to get you away from sin and those areas where you're closing your heart to God. And I think we need to recognize where we can find ourselves here. And we also need to recognize too that the very society that Paul's talking to, I don't think it's very undifferent. Undifferent? It's probably not a word. It's not very different. Thank you, Cillian. It's not very different to the world we're in. I mean, sure, culturally, socially, it might seem different. But I'm pretty certain some of the same sins that existed back then are certainly existing now. There's just a different face to them, right? So I think in a way we need to have the courage to listen to St. Paul and let him challenge us. What a good word. Thank you, listening to the Spirit there, Glenn. Where we need to let the Lord challenge us to move into areas of transformation, right? Not out of condemnation or guilt, but out of God moving us into something new, right? I want to share a little bit about Brian's story, right? So Brian was a young man who had experienced some rejection in his life due to great emotional pain. And he had experienced a great fear of rejection. Now, what happened in Brian's life, he started to develop this pattern that whenever he felt rejected or fear of rejection, he started to withdraw and isolate from other people. He wasn't isolating so much physically, but more emotionally and mentally, just pulling away from them constantly. Right? So whenever he'd feel that hint of rejection, immediately he'd withdraw, he'd retreat, and over time too, he started developing quite negative patterns of thinking. Thoughts of criticism and judgmentalism towards everybody else, and a whole lot of superiority. How much better am I than them? Now, this continued to develop in his life, so that whenever that pinch of rejection would be felt, immediately he learned within an instant how to withdraw, isolate, retreat, criticize, judge, I'm superior, right? Brian is in great need still of love. Now, hopefully I'm still on the camera, it doesn't matter anyway, you can see me and hear me. Right, I don't need to move over, Susan tells me. I'm just trying to give a bit of visual as well, right? If everybody's over there, I've moved completely away, right? So Brian is in this moment of then isolating himself from everybody else, but he's still in need of love. Where is Brian going to find love from if he's closed his door and his heart to everybody in his life? Well, at this moment in time, let's hope that the grace of God can fill him up and take him all the way back to find either God or find community with other people. But there's still a possible and probably very likely chance that if he's been saying no to the Spirit of God, and yes, maybe to the lies of the enemy for such a long time, what's the chance, just the possibility, that he's then at this point in time going to say, oh, okay, I'll change my ways right now, right? That's possible that he might turn to God, but it's also possible he may not. In this moment of isolation, complete emptiness and darkness, of a negative darkness, he might turn to other areas. I think those nice testimonies of, I sought for love in the wrong places. So no doubt, Brian seeks love in the wrong places. But it's in those moments that all the red flags go off. Makes him feel guilty and full of shame. Or, I know I've now crossed a boundary, says Brian. There's something wrong here. Now it's at that point that Brian starts calling out for help. I'm bound and other things like that. I need some help because of those guilts and shames, because of looking for love in the wrong places have come up in my life. So we can see maybe the impurities, right? Sins of the flesh. These become the big red flags in our life. But what's the chance of having to work on that and say no down here if we're not prepared to let the Lord work on the smaller things that might seem small but are really big down here as well? These are the things that are foundational. So St. Paul's going to say to us, maybe in a more modern context, that we are to yield to the Spirit. St. Paul's going to start tackling not just these big issues, but all the issues down here where we're not listening to the Spirit of God's truth. Because God wants to heal every moment of our lives, from the big things all the way down to the minor things, but the minor things that might be the root cause, that is the small little trigger that the enemy can flick at a switch that gets us all the way down here and into the land of chaos. Right? And so, what does God want in us? Well, we can apply this to even to our lives, where the Spirit needs to draw us into a greater depth of union in yielding to Him, where every one of us has a story. Sure, hope to God you don't have to get to this point of looking for love in the wrong places, please God. But along this journey, God can stop or draw you into healing and redemption at any point in time. Right? And ideally, to get to that point, that foundation of removing that lie so that you can walk in freedom. All right? Now, St. Paul's remedy. is a little bit like what I started explaining already. St. Paul's remedy for moving out of all of this is now to live in the truth of God. When we go through Unbound and we actually help people through removing the lies in their lives, we don't just do deliverance for deliverance sake. We don't tell people to renounce all of these things just so they feel good about renouncing them. We give them Unbound so they can now walk in the truth of God. And it's that, and that is the reason why we do deliverance. To walk in the blessings of God, the truth of God. Right? So what St. Paul is going to teach us, and where he's going to push us, is to then saying what you need to have as your vision of your mindset is the truth of God, the blessings of God. Oh, look at that. I'm so bad with slides. What you need to see as your vision is the truth, the love, and the blessings of God. So if I summarize, on the flip side, what does it look like to participate in God's nature, His truth, and His love? It's like this, if I can summarize it as best as I can, right? Or actually, I had to ask Copilot to help me. So he just did it for me. So here we are, a life in the Spirit, right? Of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control. Now, the relationship strengthening virtues, right? Where we're practicing good for other people, encouraging the faint-hearted, helping weak, practicing humility and mutual submission, seeking unity, seeking unity in a common mind. Bingo, right? The life that we're called to. Responding with good rather than harm or retaliation. Walking in obedience, keeping in step with the Spirit of God. Being receptive to His voice. Even, St. Paul would say, even to prophetic words, right? Testing and holding on to what is good, right? And giving thanks. How often when I'm tired, I do not want to give thanks, right? But give thanks in all circumstances. Rejoicing, praying continually, and abstaining from every form of evil, right? St. Paul wants you to have as a vision the truth of God, right? And as St. Paul wants us to, as St. Paul sort of starts unpacking this idea of yielding to the Spirit within his texts, St. Paul is very human, right? He knows that there is certainly a temptation within all of us to resist that work. He knows the pressure, right, of what it is to say yes to God and no to the flesh, right? But St. Paul is also very mindful that there's something much greater at work in all of us. That where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And that we can be strengthened in power through God's Spirit in our inner being so that Christ may dwell in our hearts through faith. And let me just read straight from the text of St. Paul. That being rooted and grounded in love, we may have the strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, the length, the height, and the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses all knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. St. Paul is very mindful that every grace is given to us to have that vision, truth, and love of God in our lives. And the battle for us is cooperating with the Spirit. It is a very real one to cooperate and not resist. So if I summarize Paul's pattern, right? Let me summarize it like this. He's going to invite you to walk in the Spirit. So have an active, ongoing alignment to God's Spirit and to His nature. Not to quench the Spirit. So don't smother the flame of the Spirit. Keep in step with the Spirit. So match your pace to God's. And be filled with the Spirit. So allow yourself to be permeated by God. Now, I kind of think there could be a talk in each one of these areas, right? And I'm not going to go through all of them today. But for as far as your imagination can take you, in terms of trying to define what some of those areas are, where might you find yourself on the list? Sometimes I think I can find myself more in don't quench the Spirit, right? Sometimes I could easily find myself engaging in those relationship, community type of weakening attitudes and thoughts, right? But where do you find yourself? For others, they might recognize the need that I need to be filled with the Spirit. Instead of watching too much TV or news that clutter the mind, I might need to turn to the Lord and let God permeate my being. There might be others who might feel that they need to walk in the Spirit more, where they need to have a simple trust in allowing God to turn everything for good. Right? And I think there was one of them that I missed, and that was walking in the Spirit, do not quench. I think I mentioned keeping in step with the Spirit. How often I want God to do things faster. Come on, God. Like, why aren't you keeping up with me, right? Where's God in this moment? And I think they're kind of very real things that we experience as human beings. Letting God set the pace. Don't quench the Spirit. Just stay active and aligned to Him. And allow yourself to be drawn into a greater intimacy with Him. And I want to share a little bit of a story about another friend that I knew. His name's Richard. And at a young age, he came to know the Lord. So he's around the age of 16. He came to know the Lord through a youth mission team called YWAM. And you heard of YWAM, Youth with a Mission? Great. Thanks, Empire. He came to know the Lord through YWAM. Now, YWAM, if you don't know, young people would take out 12 months where they kind of live all in a house. They get formation, like Christian formation, and then they go out on mission trips in the year, right? Now, it was on one of those mission trips that Richard the gospel was given to him. Complete atheist, the gospel was given to him, and his life just changes, radically converted. And after that age, he finished his high school certificate. He finished his school certificate, so age of 16, finished grade 10, really didn't care much for school at all, wasn't that way inclined. So the following year, which would have been 16, 17, he did YWAM, volunteered a year. Then he volunteered a second year and a third year. Eventually then they made him a leader, from a leader to a manager, and eventually he became a coordinator of a campus. He stayed at this for a very long time. All he had ever known was YWAM. But what took place is the world started to change. Young people stopped volunteering for YWAM. So all over the world, it wasn't just in Australia, all over the world, they had to start closing campuses, especially in Europe, just closing them all down, because young people weren't volunteering anymore. No matter how much advertising they were doing, they just couldn't get anyone in again. And now, as they're closing down campuses, then the focus was on Australia. They're kind of prioritising the popular places. Australia was one of the popular destinations. But then it even came to Australia and said, actually, I think we need to start following up Australia. When it came down to then, there's 2 campuses left. They said it's either Richard's one or somebody else's one. Well, Richard's saying, well, I've served God for over 30 years in this ministry. He said, I just want to serve the Lord. Surely this campus is going to stay open. Well, Richard was wrong. When YWAM did their reviews, prayed and did everything they had to do, they actually came to the decision that it would be Richard's campus that would close. All he had ever known for more than 30 years was YWAM. Now he didn't have a ministry, he didn't have a job, so you could just imagine the sort of turmoil he would have gone through. Angry, upset, he thought God had left him. What was God doing? What was God saying? Now it's in this moment, he tried looking for chaplaincy work. Couldn't get a job anywhere. Any sort of pastoral ministries, no doors were opening. The only job he could find was labouring work. So you could just imagine a 50-year-old now getting out into the field with a shovel in hand, digging trenches, lollipop popping and all these sort of things. That was his entire life now. Angry, cranky, once a minister, teacher of the word, missionary, and now he's digging holes. And a lot's going on for Richard in this time. But the good thing is, Richard's praying and seeking God. he thought, well, I better try getting some qualifications. So he tried getting a chaplaincy, a pastoral certificate. So he managed to get one of those. Still, no work. A number of years have passed now, doing labouring, getting his certificate, still not getting employment. There was one job that came up. It was to work in the army as the chaplain. He kind of thought, good luck with that, right? I've got no army military experience. And so he submitted his CV anyway, but he tried his best. Out of the blue, or it wasn't out of the blue because he submitted it, but he got a call. And the army said, well, we'd like to have you for an interview. So he went for an interview, he passed. He went for several more interviews that he had to go through, and he passed those too. And they said, actually, Richard, we don't mind you, you're pretty all right, but there's one thing, Rich, you need to pass the last test, and it's pretty severe. It's the physical. All right, we're going to put you on a course, and you're going to have to pass this. And he said, because if you don't, then you don't get the job, right? This is military. You've got to be able to be fit enough. So he prayed to God like crazy, ate up all the carbs that he had to, and he went for the physical test. You know what happened? He passed the physical, right? And so they said, Rich, you surprised us all. You got there, right? So welcome, you've got a job. Now that radically changed, and his heart was lifted and elevated, and that night he was reflecting and thinking, God, how on earth, I'm mid-50s now, how on earth did I pass that physical examination? And then he just felt the Lord speaks quietly into his soul and said, what do you think you've been doing for the last few years doing your labouring work? Right? And he just realised in that moment the Lord had been preparing him for what God had in store. Richard couldn't see the distant future. He couldn't see the big plan of God. But all he could see in this moment, through the difficulty, was that he was doing his best, praying and staying in check with the Spirit as best he could. Yes, he went through those tensions of being cranky with God. And on one hand, I would say this, if I just go back to reflect and think about yielding to the Spirit, and maybe I'll just make some comments on that, especially on Richard's story, right? God sees the big picture, but he asks us to trust him. I do think that on one hand, we'd probably do better in our spiritual life if we stopped fighting God. As difficult as that might be, instead of stop fighting God, we have to obviously get to a point of saying, I trust you, as painful as it might be, or as confused as I might feel. I need to trust you. But I will also say, on the flip side, I think God can actually really handle our disappointments. And God's strong enough to handle our complaints, right? You can throw rocks at God, but it's kind of like, I think I even just wrote it down like this. We can wrestle with God, but as long as it is God who we are wrestling with, right? We can wrestle with God, but as long as it is God who we are wrestling with, and not closing our hearts to him, right? Carry on with that wrestle. But I do think at the same time, as I said just a little bit earlier, I do think we'd probably go a little bit further if we got to a point quick enough to go, actually, I'm tired of the wrestle. I'm going to trust you, right? I think in Richard's example, because I knew him in that time before he got that chaplaincy work, I definitely saw the tensions, the disappointments, the anger, all those sort of things. All you can do with a guy like that, just love him, right? Go, I feel for you, right? So, I do want to say that, summarising a little bit, and I'll just conclude with a couple of practical things, right? That much of our spiritual journey in yielding to the Spirit is leaving behind the lies that have bound us and yielding ourselves to the truth of the Lord. And in addition to that, God is going to invite us to participate in his nature, bringing his presence into the world. There is one saint, and this is going to lead me into a bit of a conclusion. There's one saint who was very good at balancing of life transformed and going onto mission. Hopefully the MGLs might know it. It was Ignatius of Loyola. That's the way I would put it. Because, and I suppose they even say that of the Jesuit spirituality, they describe it as contemplatives in action, right? Because God's going to transform your heart, but He's going to take you into the world to bring healing to it, right? And some of the practical things that Ignatius of Loyola would want to teach us if St. Paul was here a second back and telling us what he would ultimately say, but let's just imagine now it's like Ignatius of Loyola is going to step into the room and he's got like 3 minutes to say something, right? And Ignatius of Loyola would say, guys, this is how you need to yield to the Spirit. Number one, I want you to know you need to avoid both extremes. One extreme is self-reliance. That's self-reliance without grace. I even threw in there a desert father. Never heard of this guy. Actually, just writing the talk, I discovered him. Abbot Poman. And he would actually call this self-reliance without grace. That's pride. That's just all you, right? Ignatius of Loyola is also going to say, well, what you also need to avoid is the passivity that waits for God to do everything. That was even striking for me. The saints are going to tell me, I don't just want you to do nothing. Go, well, I'm just waiting for God to turn up. Well, I'll avoid the sin if He comes into my room and then just shakes me up and says, get out of it. He's not going to do that, right? What the Lord wants you to do is take action, right? So, even Abba Poema would then call that sloth if we're just, passive. Now, can we get the aircon on? It just flicked off. I just felt it. Give me a second. Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. So, Ignatius' advice is that God will initiate and we need to respond, right? For the ultimate goal of the spiritual life is learning to conquer oneself and regulate our lives. In other words, if we want to yield to the Spirit and participate in God's nature out there, God's going to have to work on this in here, right? Because it's only through regulating this life interiorly that we can respond freely to God's invitation. A bit like Brian, right? Where if you want to respond to God freely, get down to the root issues here to find freedom there, right? So what is the last thing that Ignatius would tell you then is what I need you to do on a daily basis is examine, right? I think if you've heard the Angels or others speak, I'm pretty certain you would have heard them say something like this before, right? So I hope it's not completely new. If it is, well, I can just cover off a couple of things. Number one is to recognize that God is active in your life regularly, in the good and in the bad, right? So what it requires of us in responding is to stop to recognize where God is present, right? And those recognitions of how God is present happens on a daily basis. I would even say from personal experience, it doesn't just work if I do it at the end of the day. I need to do it in the morning, I need to do it at lunch, I need to do it after work, and I need to do it in the evening, right? It's every few hours. It takes a couple of minutes for me to look at my heart and say, where did I feel either consolation or desolation? Where did I feel on the consolation side, the peace, the joy, any sense of clarity and love? Where did I feel positive and helpful, elevated? Or where was I feeling the fear, agitation, discouragement? Where was I feeling down? And I would say, when I first heard about all of this, I would thought, I don't think I have that many emotions in one day. I'm sorry. But to be honest, the more you start doing that, the more you start noticing there are heaps of emotions that stir up in one day, right? Sometimes they're the same emotions at breakfast, lunch and dinner, right? But they're there, right? The fears, my worries, my discouragements. But all of those are opportunities for prayer, right? St. John of the Cross would even tell me about that as well. Like that's the energy where God is. God's right in those moments where I'm discouraged, where I'm annoyed, where I'm scared. That's where I find God, right? It's not a matter of thinking He's not there. That's exactly where God is. That's exactly what God's doing in my life. And when I feel then the joy, the clarity, the peace, the consolation, the elevation of my heart, I stop and I rejoice in that. It's like, thank God. What a joyous experience. So all I can encourage us to do is on a daily basis, even a few times in the day, I don't think it can just be done in my personal opinion, at night time, from experience. For busy people, I think it takes small intervals of checking in to say, how am I going in terms of consolation or desolation in the last few hours? You review it with God. Where was the Spirit drawing me? Where has there been the resistance? And I take those opportunities to let God be there just for a few moments. And that's enough. If we want to start going on this journey of yielding to the Spirit in our lives, it's kind of like it requires a little bit of time, but enough intentional time to let God change us inwardly, regulate us, so that we can move to then participating in his life outside with other people. There we are. That brings us to the end of yielding to the Spirit. Number one talk. Finish it! So, yeah, take a photograph, because I think that'll be really good to do if you can, right? Just pick up that practice, right? I haven't really thought about a response. Maybe the response is really quite practical. To maybe, if you're willing to, pick this up. Just try it for a little while. At least for the next fortnight, at least till we meet. And let's see how you go. Or if you're going to think of a Lenten practice, maybe consider some of this too. Sorry, Greg, did you get your photograph?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. The mic. Yeah, so maybe if I can just leave it there to say, well, maybe that will be our practice for as a way of responding to maybe yielding to the Spirit. Just consider that, right? So, yeah, we feel all right? Yeah, okay, we'll just, in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right. That's all right. Okay. All right. Now you need to imagine I'm going to put on another hat, and I'm going to finish the gathering, all right? So when you're ready, can I ask you to, it sort of feels weird not finishing with a prayer. Maybe I just need to, maybe I should then. All right, let's just take a moment. I just sort of feel like funny to sort of, it's not over yet, but let's just take a moment then. Thank you, Holy Spirit. I just have that, Richard's story might have really struck some people about needing to wait on God out of the midst of disappointments. Where is God? Maybe why God's not moving fast enough. I feel let down. I've given so much time. Why am I not being backed up, supported, left out to dry? Whatever it is. I just feel like the Lord's consoling, wanting to console you and really speak deeply to your soul that I am here. The Lord, the Father, was with Christ even in the garden. He was close to his Son in the garden. He strengthened his Son in the garden, sending him angels. So the Lord consoles you. It's difficult, it's challenging, but the Lord is with you. You will see the glory of the Lord shine upon your life. You will see his kingdom come. God will bring a breakthrough. And just like the word that invited us today, for some others it might just even be letting the Lord challenge us to step into the newness of life, accepting his truth. So Spirit, come. For we say yes to you. To fill us with your truth. We say yes to courage and strength and living a life of your Spirit. For you believe in us, Lord, and we thank you. Well, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be,